From the Owner's Box is sponsored by Empower Lab. I can tell you from my personal experience, working with Don has helped my business immensely. He does one-on-one coaching with me and my team, and our monthly peer group meetings have been valuable. For more information, please visit empowerlab.com. Welcome to the Owner's Box. I'm your host, David Williams, and today my co-host and sponsor is our guest. Welcome, Don Pierro.
Thanks, David. This is going to be real interesting to be on this side of the conversation.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a lot of fun today. I want to jump right in with, tell us about, you touched on your experiences with your dad in previous podcasts. I'd like to start there. Tell us about that relationship with your dad and how it inspired entrepreneurialism.
You know, I think as I think it through, my father was a real do-it-yourselfer. And somehow watching him, whether it was something he fixed around the house or something he fixed on the family car, I think early on it got me in the idea that whatever I'm going to do it myself.
And so that's how you became inspired to be entrepreneurial? I mean, was he an entrepreneur?
You know, interestingly enough, he was a high school dropout that went into the Air Force and was trained as a electrical engineer, an associate engineer, because he had no degree. Went to work in the aerospace program, and I can remember, interestingly, as a kid, contracts with the government every 5 years or so. My dad was sweating getting laid off, and that cycle happened right up until I was in high school, when he finally did get laid off. A government contract ended, and when he got laid off, he ended up buying a restaurant and became an entrepreneur in midlife.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so your first business, not ironically, was a restaurant.
Well, yeah, and not coincidentally. Although when I think about it, my entrepreneurial side surfaced really in junior high. I used to buy bicycles from my friends that were beat up and broken, and I'd clean them up and paint them up and resell them for a profit. And throughout junior high, I probably went through, I'm going to say, 10, 12 bicycles, buying and selling. I'd no sooner get one fixed up than I'd sell it and find another junker that I'd fix and clean up and sell again. And interestingly enough, when I got to high school and got a driver's license, I started doing the same thing with cars. One of my friends' cars would break down, and I'd buy it from him for next to nothing, polish it up, fix it up, turn around and sell it to another friend.
It sounds like you're a do-it-yourself kind of guy.
Yeah. And,
so I have to ask this question because the restaurant business has always scared me. I think restaurant is like the hardest form of retail out there. And I'd like to hear, tell us what owning a restaurant was like.
You know, you're right. Restaurant's a very tight margin business, and it's a business you've got to pay a lot of close attention to. You have to watch nickels and pennies, or it doesn't make it. And where I was really lucky is while I was buying and selling cars to pay my way through college, I studied accounting. And that accounting background turned out to be invaluable to me, especially in that early restaurant opportunity. And funny thing is, went to college, so I could become an accountant, and found myself 6 months into a job in an accounting firm with this realization that I didn't want to be an accountant. I wanted to have one.
Yeah, I get that. It reminds me of I go to my dad when I was like just coming out of high school, and I say, "Dad, I'm going to be a marketing guy." And my dad says, "Bullshit, you're going to study finance." And studying finance turned out to be invaluable. But going back to the restaurant business, I mean, again, you've talked about those small margins and having to, really be on top of it. If someone was listening today and they were thinking about going into the restaurant business, what would you tell them?
Make sure that you love the idea of hospitality and serving food. That was the biggest lesson for me. That business is so difficult and so tight that unless you love it, you're not going to be able to be successful at it, because it takes every ounce of your attention and focus to keep it in profitability.
So Don, what happened with those restaurants And how do you go from restaurants to coaching CEOs?
Well, with the restaurants, I grew it from 1 to 5 stores. And in the course of that experience, something that I mentioned just a few minutes ago occurred to me, which was I wasn't in love with the restaurant business or being in it. What I was in love with was business. And this had really been a proving ground for me that I could do it. But it wasn't what I wanted to have on my tombstone, that he was the world's greatest restaurateur. So I put them up for sale. And the interesting thing about that, and you shared this in your podcast, is that for most of that run building those restaurants, every dime and dollar that I didn't need to feed myself and my family went back into building the next restaurant. And so that the moment where I sold them was the first time really in my life where I actually had money. I had some cash in the bank. And so it was time for the next business. And the next business turned out to be a move to Texas, which had just gone through an oil bust and was kind of depressed. And I started buying land, splitting it into lots and selling those lots to builders. Coming from California, I was excited about being in the real estate business because California real estate kind of stair-stepped up always. It would flatten out, increase, flatten out, and increase. Got to learn a big lesson in Texas that their market was a little different. It has peaks and valleys. And when the first valley came along, I realized that I might not be the best guy to play high-stakes poker, buying land and cutting it up into lots. And so it was kind of time for a plan B. And plan B was that I was buying a lot of signs for the lots from a couple of older guys that were about to retire. And I went to them and said, would you like to sell me the sign company? I think I need to get back into an operating business rather than a high-stakes poker business slinging real estate. They sold the company to me, and I jumped in and decided, well, why don't I do the same thing I did in the restaurants? I'll start buying sign companies, roll them up together, and then sell it again and go from there, which is another interesting thing to your question about this evolution of becoming a coach, because I ended up buying and selling about 4 different businesses before I had this aha one day that, like, my joy is in the build as opposed to the maintain. Maybe I should start a business that helps people build their businesses, and then we can all have fun and grow together.
And what caused that aha? Like, what was it? Was it a moment, an instance where you realized, oh, I like building?
Well, strangely enough, it was at Christmas, and my mother was talking to the family and some of the friends at dinner, and she started to make a joke, and she said, you know, Don, you can't even hold a job when you own the company. And everybody kind of laughed. And I thought, hey, you got a point there. You know, I like building them. I don't really like maintaining them. And so from there, it was kind of like, I should start a company that builds companies.
I love this. You know, I think about the stereotypical entrepreneur that people think who may be outside the entrepreneurial world, where they think that these guys are all start stuff and then sell it off. And most entrepreneurs run a very small business, and they run it for a long time, and then hopefully they sell it or they pass it on to their legacy. But there are people out there, I think, that are truly gifted at starting and getting things running, and then turning it over to a management team or selling it. And do you put yourself in that category?
I do. It's part of why I really enjoy working with Sam Longo and enjoyed his podcast, because I too had a philosophy from the get-go that whatever job I had, I needed to only have it temporarily, that I needed to replace myself and eventually work myself out of a job. My feeling from the beginning was my job is to make sure everybody else is successful at their job, that I'm not supposed to have any jobs. And so with each company, that would be how I would grow them. I'd grow myself out of each level that I was in until my job was just helping everybody else do their job.
And so that's where the coaching background comes from, because that's all about coaching.
I think so. You know, some people ask me, well, how long have you been coaching? And I really want to answer 40 years, the whole time, even though the formal training kind of came 25 years in. The informal training was just as valuable. I think what's been key is to help CEOs. It's almost impossible if you haven't been one or been 3 or 4, which was my story.
You know, I'll tell you what I really like about your coaching model, and especially when it comes to the monthly peer meetings. I say it's analogous to the Knights of the Round Table. 16 CEOs will leave their armor and their sword at the door. They walk in essentially or metaphorically naked without their ego and their pride, and they sit down at a table with 15 other CEOs as equals, and they share and they help each other with no other interest in seeing their counterpart be successful. And it's that model that is, I feel like, so successful. And, in your capacity, you're sort of the moderator of that. We don't have anybody who's higher or lower. Everybody's equal at the table, including you, Don. And it works so well. Am I on to something here with this idea of Knights of the Round Table? Let me hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. I think the Knights of the Round Table are the Musketeers, and kind of the slogan, all for one and one for all. And interestingly enough, that's perfect. We do all leave our swords at the door, and especially me. I'm a facilitator in that room, and the most important thing for me to do is stay out of the way and let all those great experienced minds meld and create a synergy for each other that's absolutely magical. I know I find myself 10 years into chairing these groups, blown away each month at the stuff that comes out of the combination of these great minds.
So, Don, I really enjoy peer group processing a challenge by a member. Walk us through that process, and let's help the listener see how valuable that can be.
Well, I would say the key concept behind it all is actually on my email signature, where it says, "We don't answer your questions, we question your answers." And we create an environment in that room that's based on inquiry. It's based on questions. It's based on getting a deeper understanding of what's going on before moving in the direction of suggestions or solutions for how to solve it. And in that room, one of my roles is to keep it in discovery or exploration as long as possible before we move to suggestion or solution. And when we do that, the suggestions and the solutions are based on fact and deep understanding, and thereby powerful in terms of best avenue to go forward with either a challenge or an opportunity.
Let me just add to that, which is the 15 other CEOs sitting around the table have unique experiences, and their solution or their suggestion is coming out of their own experiences. And so you could have a challenge. And again, sometimes being a business owner or CEO is very lonely. And so hearing somebody else having gone through a similar challenge can shed light on, your path to getting through that challenge. And you're not alone. The other thing I would say that I really like about your process is at the very end of it, the person who raised the issue or challenge is asked, what, if anything, are you going to do about it? And that's where I like that peer accountability, where you know that the person who's saying or asking that question has your best interests at heart.
Yeah, and this is a key concept too, because we followed up at the next meeting with what did you do and how did it work? But this is where it gets really powerful, because the question is, what did you do and how did it work for you, as opposed to us having a judgment around what you did or what you should have done. It's about how do you feel you did with your commitment. And that's a powerful approach to performance. It's the whole idea of accountability comes from within as opposed to from the outside. And so for us as leaders, and even leaders leading leaders like in our peer group, if we can help someone else hold themselves accountable, it's the most powerful accountability I've ever seen.
Absolutely agree with that. I think that just going through the process as a bystander, just hearing the information from all the other is valuable. And then, there's no judgment in this process. So if you choose to do nothing about it, that's also a choice. And that's what I like about it. So segueing into one-on-ones, because part of what you do and why you're so successful is you coach CEOs and executives on a one-on-one basis. Lead us into how you learn the skill sets to do that. Like, where does that come from?
Well, again, most of it comes from what I call failing forward fabulously myself. Having owned four different businesses, bought them, built them, and sold them, there were some successes, and there were also a lot of periods that weren't what I call all giggles and grins. In fact, some of the greatest learning has come from the failures and left me in a place of believing that we probably learn more and are successful more as a result of our failures than we are of our successes. Those successes actually are spawned by failures.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As one of your clients, I can tell you from personal experience, one of the things that I really like about you is how you relate your own life experience to some of the challenges that we face. But what's even more important to me, as I think about how people could get value out of having a mentor or a coach, is it's that time spent outside the business, working on the business rather than in the business. And I can tell you that I spent a lot of years working in the business, the cog in the wheel. I've spent a lot of years challenging myself to work myself out of the cog of the wheel and out of the day-to-day. And I mean, even today, sometimes I find myself still in the trench to a degree, or in the grass. And it's those meetings with you or with a mentor or a coach that pull you out and really get you to focus on working on the business and getting into the owner's box, which I think is an important attribute to be focusing on.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits of having a coach is objectivity. Because my experience has been the things that I can say to somebody as that outside objective observer that's totally about working on the business are entirely different than when I was a CEO regularly being seduced into my business. For example, if I said to somebody when I was a CEO, you're challenged, you're in trouble, if things don't get better, there's a good chance you're going to end up working for somebody else instead of us, that person would crumble. As a coach, when I say those same words, that person says thank you. I was fortunate enough to at one point have coaches in my business. However, if I could go back and do it over again, I would have had them from the beginning, and I would have been in a peer group. I would have had that force of objectivity that comes from my fellow CEOs in a peer group, and also my personal executive coach, who ideally has experienced themselves as an owner.
Well, it makes me want to ask you this question, which is, if for the listening audience, how do you find and how do you choose an executive coach?
What I suggest is it's like buying a car. You test drive it. When people inquire to work with me, my approach is I want you to come spend some time with me. I want you to come spend some time with the peer group if that's of interest to you as well, and see if it's a fit for you and if it's a fit for them or me. This is a very deep, intimate, close, critical experience, and it's not something you can sell to somebody or something that you can even go and pick and buy. You've got to try it on first, and if it fits, it's amazing, and if it doesn't fit, keep shopping.
Yeah, and what does fitting mean? Like, what does that mean? Is it getting advice or being told what to do, or is it what does that mean?
I think what it means is both parties feel like the combination of this experience is going to yield a return of significance. Interestingly enough, some people aren't particularly coachable, even when they think they are. They just really are lost in their way or the highway, or are just so locked up they can't listen or receive. And those people are people that, from my side of things, I need to just wish well and send down the road. Some coaches really aren't coaches. Some of them are consultants or counselors, which is an entirely different approach. They don't evoke or pull out of somebody their best game. They try to put a game on them. And so from the client's side, that's something that they should be looking for. Is this somebody that's going to bring my potential out, or is this somebody that's going to try to press their potential on me? Because that's a consultant. That's not a coach.
Yeah, I can tell you from my own personal experience that I've had coaches who want to come in and ask me what I did for the last 30 days, and they think there's a requirement of accountability, and I can tell you that no one has ever had to hold me accountable except for myself. And I'm not looking for somebody to give me answers. I'm looking for somebody to challenge my thinking. And when I've talked about mentors and being mentored, and I think about executive coaching, for those of you who do not have an executive coach and are contemplating it, you want somebody to come in there and really challenge you to think outside of what your normal thought processes are. So an example of that for me would be, hey, let's draw up an org chart 3 years from now. What does this look like 3 years from now? And it's a wonderful experience, and that's an example of how I think an executive coach can work with you. Another example for me personally is when you have a challenging report. You got some person in a position that's providing some level of challenge, and you got to think creatively on how to manage that challenge. You just can't just go firing everybody every day. Sometimes you got to find ways to navigate through helping an employee become a better employee, or maybe helping an employee become an entrepreneur. One of the challenges that I was facing earlier in my career, and honestly, it's a challenge every year, is strategic planning. And Don and Power Lab have the services to help executives do strategic planning and execution. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Don?
It's interesting. My strategic planning approach is completely out of the box from traditional strategic planning. And what I mean by that is it's extremely simplified. All of my experience with strategic plans showed that for the most part, consultants and MBA types came in, created these 15, 20, 50-page plans, and those plans were so complex that they were almost impossible to execute. And so I was inspired to create a one-page strategic plan that's very, very simple, that focuses on the top 3 to 5 priorities for the year that can be executed, so that at the end of the year, we can all have a party and celebrate that what we planned to do, we actually did. You mentioned the future org chart, and that's become a profoundly powerful tool in the strategic plan. With the organizations that we started to implement a 3-year out org chart, what happened was in typically 18 months, that org chart was executed, that we had grown into it. And so that simple tool, current org chart, future org chart, helped create a transfer of the vision to the team of where we're going and how we're going to get there in terms of the human capital that we're going to need to use for it.
When I first started in business, and I'd just gotten out of business school, it was always the 3 to 5 year business plan. And, I'm hearing and seeing a lot of these, 1 to 3 year plans. And even lately, I've been hearing about the 90-day sprint. What are your thoughts on longer term planning than 1 year?
Well, what's exciting is in current times, change is happening at a much more rapid pace. And with that, it's getting harder and harder to look out 5 years, 10 years, or whatever else. So I still like to have that look, but I like it to be more of a sketch and to really focus on what does the next year look like, maybe even 3. But to your point, 90-day intervals have become the most powerful. Daisy chaining 4 90-day intervals together to create a year. And beyond that, maybe to look out 3, but between 1 and 3 to be nimble, to be ready to shift and change on a dime, because just like we've seen in the last 2 years with everything around the pandemic, in addition to the pandemic, there have been all kinds of underlying shifts and changes in the way we work, how we work, and how the whole world functions. This has been the best experience ever for seeing the importance of being nimble.
I totally agree with that. One of the other things that I think about with strategic planning is my old process and my new process. And let me explain really quick. The old process was I would write a strategic plan, I'd hand it to the executive team and say, now go execute it. And we would never meet our goals. New process is I ask the executive team to assist me, help me. I ask them to write the strategic plan, and then we go and execute it, and we hit our goals. What have been your experiences with that?
Well, this is where the millennials have been a big gift to society. The silent generation, it was kind of do what you're told. The baby boomers do most of what you're told. And as the X and Y showed up, it was like, we're not going to do what we're told, we're going to do what makes sense. And that created what I call the people support what they participate in these days. And the truth is, it's probably always been the truth, but it's surfaced here in these more recent generations. So to your point, when the team feels like they created the plan, they're way more excited about executing the plan. And execution is where the emphasis should be. And that, again, has been part of me taking a new approach to strategic planning by putting the emphasis on executing a simple plan that was created by the team, because they support what they participate in.
Yeah, you are so absolutely spot on with that. And so I hope the listener really thinks about that, especially those that have a slightly more mature business who have an executive team. Get yourself out of the cog of the wheel. Let the team create the plan. Empower them. Trust them. And keep your finger on the pulse and do those monthly and quarterly KPI reviews, key performance indicator reviews, to make sure you're tracking against plan, and make adjustments when you start to come off plan or a pandemic hits or something like that. Don, let me ask you this, because you know how much I love working with entrepreneurs, and I don't do this officially. I don't ever charge anybody money for this. It's not my business, and I don't currently plan to go into the business of coaching, but I do take a lot of enjoyment at it. What would you say to somebody who's, say, in the latter part of their career, who's really thinking about, hey, I'd really like to coach CEOs and entrepreneurs? What would you say to them?
Well, first thing I'm thinking is, you just said what you said, is maybe your destiny, personally. But what I would say to them is, go for it. If again, it's kind of a form of passion. If you feel that feeling in your gut and you've got the experience behind you, there's nothing more fun than sharing it and seeing it yield for others. But I want to go back to strategic planning, because you inspired two other thoughts that have been big learnings for me and the companies I've worked with in the last couple of years. And one of those is companies often, almost always, have a growth goal. They want to grow their business to be bigger next year. And the companies that I've seen have the greatest success and the best profitability are the companies that decide, rather than grow 15%, we're going to grow 8 to 9%, and we're going to pick the 8 or 9% that we're going to do business with. A fatal flaw, or not a fatal flaw, but a dangerous flaw for a lot of companies, is just to grow unbridled. Get as much new business as you can. And the companies that taper back and say, instead of growing 20%, I'm going to grow 12%, and I'm going to get the best 12% out there, those companies grow at the maximum profitability, record-breaking profitability for their industries. The second thing that's been fascinating for me is the companies that realize that we have a goal to grow and thereby maintain excess capacity in their personnel in order to be able to accommodate that growth, grow the fastest and the most profitably. And so often companies are operating with just enough people, and yet they have a 10 to 12% growth goal, and that taxes their team, and they end up hitting walls rather than hitting touchdowns or getting it over the goal line.
Yeah, so for those companies, they have a deeper bench, they have career planning, they're investing in their employees so that the growth is not so tenuous on the team. Yeah.
Yes, and they're in working on the company, they're realizing, if in fact I do want to grow, I need to have capacity to grow, and if I have the capacity in advance, then I will proactively grow. If I don't have the capacity in advance, I'm going to reactively grow, at which point I can hit some bumps and lumps that I could have avoided.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching on a point that's really resonating with me, which is I myself and many others that I've worked with are like, sell it first and then we'll figure out how to make it. And what you're saying is the most successful companies plan internally for growth, and then they go out and get specific growth.
Yes.
Well, I hope the listeners hearing this, because I think you're spot on.
Well, and it's so fun for me as a coach, because when I was a CEO, like the folks around the tables that I work with, if I hire somebody else for $100,000 a year, well, my profit's going to be $100,000 less. and that's a paradigm that has to be broken, because if you hire the right person for the right position, they're going to make 2 or 3 times what they cost, just like all the rest of the people on your team. And it's a fun experience for me because, again, most of the folks I work with think like I thought when I was doing it, and yet, again, as this objective outsider, I get to be the guy that says, hey, remember, that isn't how the math works. The math actually works with an ROI.
It must, I can tell you, it's a joy to work with Don, because every one-on-one, every meeting, you get a golden nugget like we just got here with that one. So thank you for that, Don. You know, we always end our program with asking or soliciting, 3 nuggets that you would want the listener to really hear. What are those for you, Don?
The first one that comes to mind is work yourself out of a job. You didn't start this thing so that you could beat yourself to death for 20 years and then get a big payday. Be in a hurry to get into the owner's box. Be the owner, be the leader, be the inspirer, be the guide on the side. It'd be the first one. Next nugget is make it a point to make the business rich first, and ideally you and your team after that. And what I mean by that is take care of your people, take care of your vendors, pay your bills on time or early, build goodwill. It comes back to help you like you can imagine. Third nugget I take from Winston Churchill and from a guy named Rick Kaufman, who I got to spend some time with, the founder of the Pioneer Chicken Chain. And that is never, ever give up. Rick had this statement that if you don't quit, there's no possible way you can lose. And that's a key piece to this entrepreneurial journey. It was true for me, and it's been true for pretty much everyone that I've coached. That inner verve that says, no matter what, I'm going to keep going. If you don't give up, you can't lose.
I love those nuggets, Don. And like I say, I'm always getting great nuggets from you, and that's why I asked you to go on this journey with me. But one of the things that you said threw me back to a memory that I wanted to share. You said, pay your vendors on time or early. Well, I don't know about the other entrepreneurs, but I always had this philosophy that you have to always pay late, and the later you can pay, the better, because you're holding on to cash longer. And he says, and then I would say that if you pay on time or early, then they learn to expect that, and you can never pay late. And if things get tough or cash gets tight, then you're in trouble. And I hired a CFO years ago who came to me and said, we need to start paying our vendors on time. And I just about had a convulsion. And he said to me, I'm going to give more profit to the bottom line if you can agree to pay our suppliers on time. So I decided to do the test. And guess what happens when you pay your suppliers on time or early? You start getting better pricing. You get better service. And you get better relationships. And when they have to choose one customer over another to serve during a pandemic where raw material shortages are happening, they choose you because they know they're going to get paid on time or early. So I really like that one, Don. That was a nugget within a nugget. So thank you for that.
Well, and another piece of that is to tell the truth. What do they say? The truth will set you free. Because, when times get tough or cash gets tight, that's the other part where it's going to pay off, because those vendors know and trust you, and they will come to your rescue because of that fact. And that's a resource that is invaluable when you're in those tougher times.
I've so enjoyed talking to you, Don, as I always do, and I hope the listeners got a lot of good stuff out of this. But before we end the show, give us one more nugget as a bonus.
Well, that would be the most important one of all, probably, which is for CEOs, and not just the CEOs, but even the CEOs as they lead their leadership teams, to spend as much time as possible working on the business as opposed to in it. That time working on the business is where you figure out and you see yourselves objectively how to take it to next levels. And so the more you can do that, and the more you can lead your team into doing that, the more success you will see as a group together.
Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of our episode, Don. You've imparted so much knowledge on us. There's so much to unpack here. We probably need another episode. But I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you too. It's been really fascinating to be on this side of the conversation. Thanks.
And with that, we'll see you next time.